Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Thursday morning in another transfer portal edition for Florida State in another young offensive lineman with 4 years of eligibility remaining. I get Josh Raymond is not a super flashy name to talk about if you are a Florida State fan, but I think to a lot of Florida State fans that follow this program pretty damn closely, have an understanding of where this roster is as we speak. These are the type of additions that I think Mike Norvell has to make to build this roster back up to where it belongs over the next couple of years. We made this analogy a couple of days ago. I'll go back to it. Florida State needs to eat their vegetables. You look at teams like Georgia, you look at teams like Ohio State, you look at teams like Texas, the teams that have recruited the high school ranks right, have developed their players from the high school ranks the right way. They've earned the right to go out and make flashy additions in the portal with guys with high price tags. If you're Florida State and Mike Norvell, you have not earned that right because you've recruited poorly and you've developed poorly. You got to build the pipeline of this roster back to where it belongs before you want to start going out and making super flashy additions. And I think Josh Raymond is one of those guys. If I were to give you my 30-second elevator pitch on Josh Raymond, it starts with Herb Hand loves this kid. Wanted him bad at UCF 12 months ago. He ends up going to Vanderbilt. When he puts his name into the portal, Herb Hand called him immediately. So Herb Hand likes Josh Raymond. 4 years of eligibility remaining, guard tackle versatility. Those are the boxes that you want to see checked. Now, the other important conversation with this one is probably going to add depth to this offensive line in 2025. I would be stunned if he plays any real meaningful snaps for Florida State on the offensive line, but he's a guy that you start looking to 2026 and say, hey, potentially could be a starter for Florida State, especially given the development that Herb Hand, we know Herb Hand can develop talent. You look at Florida State's offensive line going into 2025, I'm pretty vocal that I think it's going to be a pretty dang solid unit. It's a lot of guys that have played a lot of football at a high level, at the Power 4 level. But then you start looking at 2026 and say every starter that you have on the offensive line going into 2025 is not going to be on this roster in 2026. We have not recruited and developed our young offensive linemen the way we need to. We got to reload in terms of young offensive linemen on this roster. Both Jalen Matthews and Josh Raymond are kind of those type of offensive linemen that, hey, big balls of clay. Let's see what they'll look like in 12 months. Want to get a little bit more into Josh Raymond, talk about where Florida State is going in the transfer portal before we get into it, as always. To the Florida State fans, if you have some takes on Josh Raymond, would love to have them, but we're going to have a little bit more of a deeper conversation in terms of where this Florida State team sits. Would love to hear from y'all in the comment section. I know there's a lot of Florida State fans that feel all sorts of different ways about Mike Norvell and where this program's going. Please let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. And why does Florida State have to go out and make an addition like Josh Raymond or like a guy like Jalen Matthews? It's because the kind of offensive lineman that Florida State has recruited over the last couple of cycles with Alex Atkins and the lack of development that we've seen. We don't have a ton of year 2, year 3 offensive linemen on this roster that we trust a whole lot. And so you're starting to look at, hey, how do we get back to where we belong as a program? It starts with building this roster from the ground up, focusing on the foundations. Young talent that's going to be developed over the next couple of years. Josh Raymond's one of those guys. Jalen Matthews is one of those guys. Again, Florida State has not earned the right to go get those 6-month rentals that can take your team from a 10-win season to an 11 or 12-win season national championship year. That's just not where Florida State sits as a roster. They tried to do that last year. They tried to make some of those flashier transfer portal additions that could elevate that roster. The truth of the matter was they didn't have the foundation part of their roster right. And so they didn't really earn the right to go after those type of guys because the roster wasn't in a spot where you could afford to make those additions. The part of the change that you've seen from Florida State in that, hey, look, if Mike Norvell saves his job, this is going to have to be the avenue is, we got to recognize that we have missed on way too many players at the high school ranks. We have developed the kids that we have taken out of high school at a very poor level. We have to start with getting kind of a new crop of young talent coming into this program that sets our foundation of our roster right. And then, maybe next year or 24 months from now, when your roster's in a better spot with the young talent of pipeline of talent, then you can start going after the flashier additions in the portal. Like, go back to Florida State in the winter. You made some flashy additions, Deuce Robinson, guy like Squirrel White. But a lot of those additions were not super flashy. They were guys that are proving contributors that can come in and play reliable snaps for Florida State. I think that's what you need to focus on. But you also need to focus on the young talent on this team. I think that's what Florida State's trying to do. If Florida State does make it work with Mike Norvell, I should say, if Mike Norvell does make it work at Florida State, you're going to see two things significantly change. Number one, you have to be way better in terms of recruiting the high school ranks and bringing in young talent. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a top 5 recruiting class. You just have to get the right guys into your program and develop them the right way. Michigan won a national championship in 2023, recruiting around 10 to 12 nationally in the country, but they one, were elite developing players, and number two, got the right guys into the program. I don't think Florida State's done that. And so you look at Florida State and the next steps as a program, there's not a quick fix to where Florida State's at. And I think a lot of Florida State fans who follow this program closely know that. You look at all the teams that are competing for national championships in 2025, they've done it the right way for the last 3 to 4 years. Kind of like running a marathon. I'm a guy that I don't live that healthy, man. I'm eating pizza on the weekends. I ain't eating super healthy. I ain't working out as much as I should. If I go out and run a marathon, it's gonna go poorly. Now if the last 6 months were living the right way, drinking my water, going for runs, maybe I can go out and run a marathon decently successful. If you're Florida State, you got to start living right first, doing things right first. Then you can go out and compete for national championships and try to make these flashy transfer portal additions. But as this roster sits right now, you gotta change how you're living before you can expect national championship results. I think Josh Raymond is an example of Florida State at least trying to do so. Now, is it going to work out? We'll see. But at least we're kind of getting back to, hey, what building this roster the right way. A couple other names to monitor. I mean, you have Mohamad Tore, who's kicking around a visit to Florida State. Again, a really good football player coming off an ACL injury. This is kind of like going back to, like, is this living right? This is a guy that's going to be in your program for 6 months. Like, I would rather allocate those funds to some high-level guys in the 2026 class or some younger guys in the portal that are going to have multiple years of eligibility remaining. Is Florida State at a spot where they want to spend and compete with teams like Penn State and Miami for a kid that's only going to be with your program for 6 months? Like, is he going to allow you to compete for national championship right away in 2025? No. Good football player, really good football player. But he's not necessarily the missing piece for Florida State because Florida State doesn't have a missing piece. You got to do things the right way. That's kind of where I sit. And again, Josh Raymond, what we saw with Jalen Matthews, at least you're seeing Mike Norvell make an effort to say, hey, we don't need to go after the 6-month rentals. We got to get some young guys back into our program, build this roster the right way. We'll see if Florida State can make that happen. That's kind of where I sit with where Florida State is. Would love to hear from you guys in the comments section. I'm on the message boards with y'all, and I think this is a take that a lot of y'all have too. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.